Jessica's revelation. The betrayal that changed everything. Jessica never imagined that a wrong number could change her life forever. Sitting in front of her computer screen, her tired eyes scanning the numbers on the spreadsheet, she was startled when her father's name appeared on her phone. "Dad is calling me?" A mix of joy and anxiety flooded her heart. Her father, the man she had spent her entire life trying to impress, hoping for a word of praise, a nod of approval, or even a sliver of love. But that call wasn't what she had expected. Instead of a warm voice or a caring question, Jessica heard words that shattered her heart. Her father's voice was cold and full of disdain. "She's a mistake. She never should have existed. Her whole life has been nothing but a joke." Those words cut through her like a knife. It wasn't just disappointment, it was utter contempt from the person she respected the most. Jessica froze. Her mind spiraled, every word from her father's mouth pounding down like a hammer, crushing every hope she had ever held for her family's love. Then her mother's voice chimed in, equally cold. "Greg, keep your voice down. After all, she's the one paying the mortgage for us." Her father scoffed. "That's the least she could do after everything we sacrificed for her. And she's only doing it to prove she's better than us. A failure who has never achieved anything worth being proud of." Jessica's world collapsed before her eyes. Every effort she had made, working tirelessly, achieving success in her career, even secretly buying the house so they wouldn't lose it, all of it meant nothing to them. She had sacrificed her youth to pay the mortgage on the house they were living in, through her investment company, JSC Holdings, which they had no idea she owned. She did it all hoping that one day they would recognize her, be proud of her, and maybe even love her. But now, everything was shattered as she realized they had never loved her, never been proud of her, and worse, they saw her as a burden, a mistake. Jessica felt her heart tighten, her breath becoming shallow. She wanted to scream, to confront them and demand an explanation for their cruelty. But she knew that even if she did, they would never admit the truth. Everything was just a facade, a lie, wrapped in the illusion of family love. She sat motionless before her computer screen, her eyes vacant, staring at the meaningless numbers. Memories of all she had done for them flooded her mind, sending money without expecting a thank you, paying for home repairs to make their lives more comfortable. And all she got in return was contempt and betrayal. Tears silently streamed down her face, but her heart began to harden. She realized she could no longer live to please people who never valued her. She was tired of chasing their approval. And now, she understood that she didn't need it anymore. Jessica's gaze fell on her computer screen, where the mortgage contracts were stored under JSC Holdings. She had the legal right to foreclose on the house if they couldn't make the payments. She had saved them once when they were on the verge of losing their home, but now she had no reason to continue helping people who were so ungrateful. Pain transformed into determination. Betrayal became motivation. Jessica knew what she needed to do. She would no longer be the victim. She would stand up and protect herself, and that decision changed everything. The power shift. Jessica's secret control. Jessica never imagined that she would one day hold so much power over her own family. The house they were living in, the place filled with memories of her childhood, where she once felt safe and loved, was legally hers. But they didn't know that. They thought they were paying the mortgage to the bank, completely unaware that every payment they made went to JSC Holdings, the investment company Jessica had secretly built with the help of her financial advisor, Mark. Everything started 6 years ago, when Jessica received a panicked call from her mother. Her father had lost almost everything in a failed investment, and they were about to lose their home. "Jessica, can you help us? Just this one time, we promise we'll pay you back." Her mother sobbed over the phone. Jessica didn't hesitate. She had worked hard, climbed the corporate ladder in finance, and was in a position to help. Not because they asked, but because she wanted to prove herself, to earn their approval, to be loved. With Mark's help, Jessica secretly bought the mortgage from the bank, saving the house from foreclosure. She orchestrated everything perfectly. Her parents believed they were still paying the bank, but in reality, every payment went to JSC Holdings. What they didn't know was that Jessica had been paying thousands of dollars every month to cover their shortfall. ensuring that the house remained in their possession and that they had a safe place to live. But now, after hearing that cruel conversation, Jessica realized all her sacrifices were meaningless. Not only did they lack gratitude, but they despised her, saw her as a failure, a burden. She stared at her computer screen, the mortgage documents glaring back at her. Her name was on every page. She was the real owner of that house. And if they couldn't make the payments, she had the legal right to foreclose immediately. Pain and anger turned into resolve. Jessica decided it was time for them to face the truth. They had lived under her protection for too long, exploiting her kindness without ever knowing. If they thought she was a failure, they were about to learn that their entire life depended on the failure they so easily dismissed. Jessica began analyzing their finances and saw they were in trouble and would soon be unable to make the mortgage payments. They were smugly assuming the bank would grant them an extension, but they had no idea that the person they needed to negotiate with was Jessica. With legal power in her hands, Jessica could foreclose the house the moment they missed a payment, turning them from homeowners to tenants overnight. The decision to take back control. Jessica knew she had the power to change everything. For too long, she had been the silent benefactor, protecting them even when they ridiculed her. But no more. She would no longer allow them to take advantage of her love and kindness. She called Mark and began the legal process to foreclose on the house. It was her right as the legal owner, and she would use it. They would finally learn the truth, that the house they were living in, the life of comfort they enjoyed, all of it was because of her. They were not the owners, they were merely guests living on her mercy. Jessica didn't do it out of revenge, but out of a need to reclaim her dignity and self-worth. She had been manipulated and disrespected for too long. It was time for her to stand up for herself, to show them that she was not the failure they believed her to be. When her parents received the foreclosure notice from JSC Holdings, they were stunned. Confused and panicked, they tried to contact the bank, only to be redirected to Jessica's company. Her father, furious and humiliated, confronted her, demanding to know why she would do such a thing. Jessica looked him in the eye, her voice steady and cold. "Because I've been saving you for 6 years, and all you've given me in return is contempt. You think I'm a failure? Then let's see how you survive without the failure you despise so much." In that moment, Jessica took back her power. She didn't just reclaim her house, she reclaimed her life, her self-worth, and her future. Jessica was no longer the obedient daughter seeking approval. She was the woman who controlled her destiny. The woman who refused to be belittled or broken. And she was just getting started. Jessica's deception. The final act of revenge. Jessica decided to pretend to agree when her parents begged her for more money, ensuring they wouldn't suspect her true intentions. She wanted to see how they would react when they discovered the bitter truth. The house they were so proud of actually belonged to the person they despised the most. Staring at the computer screen, Jessica felt a surge of power flow through her. She had lived too long under the shadow of contempt and betrayal. It was time to step out of the darkness, take control, and prove that she was not a failure. Jessica knew this wasn't just about money or the house. This was about breaking free from emotional chains, reclaiming her self-worth, and letting go of a toxic past. She was no longer afraid. Jessica was ready for the final confrontation. Jessica sat silently before her computer, her cold eyes fixed on the numbers in the spreadsheet. Numbers that represented the power she held. The control over the house her parents were living in. The house they didn't realize was hers. Jessica had prepared everything perfectly. She had set up the legal process to foreclose on the house the moment they missed a payment. And she knew they were on the brink of financial ruin. But Jessica wasn't in a hurry. She wanted to play the game to the end, to watch them beg for help from the person they had always looked down upon, the person they called a failure, a mistake. She wanted to see their arrogance and pride shatter, to watch them face the reality that their entire lives depended on her, the one they never respected. Step 1. The illusion of help. The first step of her revenge plan began when Jessica pretended to agree to help after her mother called, pleading for an additional $3,000 a month. Jessica knew they were struggling financially, and couldn't afford the $5,800 monthly payment they thought they were sending to the bank. They didn't know that every cent went to JSC Holdings, Jessica's investment company. The moment they missed a payment, the mortgage contract would be void, and the house would legally belong to her. 3 days later, Jessica received a call from Mark, her financial advisor. They missed the payment. The house is now yours. Jessica felt a wave of satisfaction wash over her. Everything was falling into place exactly as she planned. They were no longer homeowners, they were tenants, and if they couldn't pay rent, they would be evicted. But Jessica didn't rush to tell them the news. She wanted to see how they would react to the truth. And just as she expected, on Friday morning, her mother called in a panic, saying they had received a foreclosure notice from the bank. "There must be some mistake. You have to help us," her mother begged. Jessica pretended to be surprised, asking a few concerned questions before saying she would look into it. But Jessica didn't help them. Instead, she watched their world crumble from the sidelines. Her father tried to act strong and proud, but his trembling voice betrayed his fear and desperation. Her mother cried, pleading for Jessica to help, saying they would lose the house without her. Jessica knew their arrogance and pride were collapsing, and she held the power to decide their fate. The confrontation. The next day, her father called with a more aggressive tone, threatening, "If you don't help us, we'll never forgive you." Jessica scoffed. Forgiveness? They had never respected or loved her, so why should she care about their forgiveness? Jessica decided it was time to confront them face to face. That evening, she went to their house, the house she legally owned. She looked around the home she had paid for over the past 6 years, the place filled with childhood memories now tainted by betrayal and contempt. Her father confronted Jessica, his eyes filled with anger. "What the hell is this? This is my house." Jessica remained calm, her voice cold and steady. "No, Dad. This is my house. I bought the mortgage from the bank 6 years ago. You've been paying me all this time, and when you missed the payment this month, the house legally became mine." The air in the room grew tense. The bitter truth hit her father like a slap in the face, leaving him speechless. Her mother burst into tears, begging Jessica to give them more time. But Jessica stood firm. "You have 30 days to leave, or I'll initiate legal eviction proceedings." Jessica didn't feel guilty. She had sacrificed too much, endured too much betrayal and contempt. Now, she was no longer the victim. She held the power and controlled their destiny. They had lived under her protection for too long without gratitude. It was time they faced the reality that they depended entirely on the person they had always looked down upon. Jessica walked out of the house, leaving behind the painful past and the memories of betrayal. She walked away with freedom and peace. She had won, not just the financial battle, but also the emotional war to free herself from her family's contempt. Taking back control. The endgame. Jessica sat quietly at her computer, her eyes cold with determination. She had discovered the bitter truth, that her parents and brother not only despised her, but were plotting to destroy her to seize her assets. The people she once loved and sacrificed everything for were trying to ruin her life. But they had underestimated one thing. Jessica was not someone who could be easily defeated. For 6 years, Jessica had silently paid the mortgage on their house through her investment company, JSC Holdings, without them knowing she was the real owner. They believed they were paying the bank, but every dollar they sent flowed into her account. Jessica did it not out of obligation, but because she wanted to prove herself, to be loved and acknowledged. But that fateful phone call shattered all illusions. They never loved her. They only exploited her generosity and financial support. Jessica no longer felt hurt or disappointed. Those emotions had faded, replaced by resolve and cold determination. She decided she would no longer be the victim. She would turn the tables and show them how wrong they were to underestimate her. Jessica didn't just take back the house. She also cut off all ties to the toxic relationship, refusing to be manipulated emotionally any longer. She took back her power and control over her life. Her revenge was not just about repossessing the house. It was about freeing herself from emotional chains and toxic control. She reclaimed her self-worth, no longer dependent on the approval of people who never truly loved her. Jessica won, not just the financial battle but also the emotional and psychological war. She liberated herself from her family's contempt and walked away stronger than ever before. The ultimate victory? Jessica's plan was flawless. She exposed their hypocrisy, shattered their arrogance, and reclaimed what was rightfully hers. She didn't just prove them wrong, she proved herself right. She proved that she was not a failure but a powerful, intelligent, and independent woman who no longer needed their approval. Walking away from the house she now fully owned, Jessica felt the weight lift off her shoulders. She was free, free from their control, free from their contempt, and free to live her life on her own terms. Jessica didn't just take back a house, she took back her life. Jessica's silent revenge, exposing Evelyn's deception. Jessica quietly sought out an estate attorney and meticulously crafted a detailed lawsuit to expose Evelyn's entire scheme in court. She didn't just want her inheritance back, she wanted to reveal Evelyn's true face to everyone, especially to her father, who had been blindly manipulated by Evelyn's lies. On the day of the trial, Jessica walked in with confidence and pride. Evelyn and Ryan tried to deny everything, but Jessica was thoroughly prepared. She presented irrefutable evidence of forgery and fraud, dismantling every deceitful plot with intelligence and determination. Evelyn was left defenseless, and Ryan hung his head in shame. The court ruled that all inheritance rightfully belonged to Jessica, recognizing her legal claim from her late mother. Evelyn and Ryan were evicted from the house they had wrongfully seized, losing not only their ill-gotten wealth but also their social standing and reputation. Jessica didn't just reclaim her inheritance, she restored justice and honor to her mother's memory, proving that maternal love and legacy could not be erased. She chose to cut all toxic ties with Evelyn and Ryan, ensuring they would never manipulate or exploit her again. Jessica had triumphed, not just in the legal battle, but in the emotional and moral war as well. She freed herself from Evelyn's control, stood tall, and reclaimed what was rightfully hers. Unmasking Margaret, the poisonous mother-in-law. Jessica never imagined that her mother-in-law, Margaret, who always appeared sweet and caring, could be so cunning and cruel. Margaret wasn't just a difficult mother-in-law. She was a master manipulator, controlling every aspect of the family, including Jessica's marriage to Steve. When Margaret realized that Jessica was too intelligent and independent to be controlled, she decided to eliminate her entirely. She began poisoning Jessica's food in small doses to make her gradually weak and sick. But the most painful betrayal wasn't from Margaret, it was from Steve, Jessica's husband, who knew about his mother's actions but chose to stay silent and do nothing to protect his wife. Jessica was devastated when she discovered the truth. The man she loved and trusted had chosen his mother over her, allowing her to be poisoned slowly without saying a word. The pain of betrayal turned into cold determination. Jessica resolved to no longer be a victim. She would not only save herself but also destroy Margaret's control and make Steve pay for his cowardice and betrayal. Jessica's first step was to gather solid evidence of the poisoning. She secretly installed cameras in the kitchen and dining room, recording Margaret's every move as she discreetly laced Jessica's food with poison. Jessica also kept all medical records and toxicology reports, proving that she was being slowly poisoned. She was not going to confront them with just emotions. She wanted irrefutable evidence to expose Margaret's crime. Once she had enough proof, Jessica chose to confront them directly. During a family dinner, as Margaret once again poisoned her food, Jessica calmly turned on the security camera footage in front of everyone. The screen showed Margaret poisoning the food, leaving the entire room in stunned silence. Margaret panicked, trying to deny everything, but the evidence was undeniable. Steve turned pale, realizing the truth had been exposed. Jessica looked coldly at her husband and said, "You knew, and you let me die slowly?" Steve couldn't meet her gaze, his guilt and cowardice laid bare. Jessica handed all the evidence to the police, and Margaret was arrested that night for attempted murder. Steve begged Jessica for forgiveness, but she replied coldly, "You chose your mother over the woman you vowed to protect." Jessica filed for divorce, severing all ties with Steve and his toxic family. Jessica didn't just reclaim justice for herself, she freed herself from Margaret's toxic control. She walked away stronger and prouder than ever. Margaret paid for her crimes, and Steve lost everything, his wife and his honor, for his cowardice and betrayal. Jessica won not only the legal battle but also the emotional and moral war. She walked away from a toxic marriage with her head held high, finally finding freedom and peace within herself. Family betrayal, the final stand against manipulation. Jessica never thought her own flesh and blood could be so cruel and ungrateful. For 6 years, she had quietly paid off the mortgage on her parents' house through her investment company, JSC Holdings, without them knowing she was the real owner. She did it out of love and a desperate desire to be accepted and loved. But then, she accidentally overheard a conversation that shattered her heart. She heard her father say with contempt, "She's nothing but a failure, a mistake we never should have had." Her mother didn't defend her, but agreed coldly, and her brother mocked her sacrifices as pathetic attempts to prove herself. Jessica was devastated. She realized that everything she had done, all her sacrifices, meant nothing to them. They never appreciated her love or her support. All they saw was a failure, a burden they were forced to tolerate, but the pain quickly turned into cold resolve. Jessica decided she would no longer be their victim. She had been paying their mortgage through JSC Holdings, and if they missed a payment, she had the legal right to foreclose and take the house. Jessica was tired of seeking their approval. She was done trying to be the good daughter they never appreciated. Instead, she wanted them to realize that their entire life depended on the very person they looked down upon. When they inevitably missed a payment, Jessica made her move. She sent the foreclosure notice from JSC Holdings, legally claiming the house. Her parents and brother were shocked and devastated. They begged, they cried, and they even tried to threaten her. But Jessica stood firm. She was no longer emotionally manipulated by their pleas or guilt trips. Jessica not only took back the house, but also cut all ties with her toxic family. She refused to let them control her emotions any longer. She had taken back control of her life and her dignity. She didn't just reclaim her property. She freed herself from emotional dependency and toxic manipulation. Jessica won, not only in the financial battle, but also in the emotional and moral war. She walked away with her head held high, finally finding freedom and peace within herself. The powerful message. Jessica's story carries a powerful message about self-worth, independence, and setting boundaries in toxic family relationships. For older audiences who may have spent their lives sacrificing for family, this story is a reminder that love should not be taken for granted or exploited. Sacrifice is only meaningful when it is appreciated. Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go, not because you no longer care, but because you need to protect your own peace and dignity. Jessica found the courage to cut ties, not out of hatred, but out of self-respect. She chose to break free from emotional chains and reclaim her life on her own terms. Her victory was not just financial, it was spiritual and emotional. The powerful lesson here is, love yourself first before you give love to others. Sacrifice has value only when it is respected. This is a lesson for people of all ages, but especially for older audiences who have given their lives to others. Jessica's journey is about reclaiming power, dignity, and freedom. It's about breaking free from toxic control and emotional manipulation. She emerged not just as a survivor, but as a victor who took back her life and self-worth. Jessica didn't just take back a house, she took back her life.